I decided that since I'm joining this conversation, that you should know a little bit about me. Full disclosure, if you will. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I have some sort of secret agenda, and I want you to understand clearly where I'm coming from, and how I am approaching this topic. So first, I'm going to give you a little backstory, and then a primer for the next part. Truth is, several years ago I was a race realist, of sorts. I was never of the opinion that any group of people were superior to any other in any way, but like many uneducated people, I assumed that people that looked different from me, physically, must be different in some other fundamental ways. What changed these opinions were very superficial explanations of race I'd learned in school 6 years ago, and these were what ultimately spawned my interest in this material. Until recently then, common sense, race realist perspectives, and Lewontin's fallacy were literally the extent of my knowledge and opinions on this topic. I believed in both. Almost 1 year ago, I made my first video on race and IQ, and entered myself into this discussion, which I'd known about for some time but had never taken seriously. The conversation didn't seem to really matter in any practical way, at least not to myself at that time. It was only after reading comments below a Stefan Molyneux video that I recognized the gravity of the claims being made. The comments, which numbered in the dozens, condemned blacks to being idiot criminals, citing the bell curve and Stefan's other materials as sources to back up their racist spiels. I surfed around a few other videos and channels, finding hundreds more similar comments across YouTube before I returned to Stefan's video to leave my thoughts in a comment below. I had only watched a little of his interview with Charles Murray at this point, and not recognizing the sophistication and relevance of his arguments, I returned to my webcam to share my thoughts on the topic. In that first video, I regurgitated, in very confused terms, the vague and vacuous points I'd had planted in my head while I was taking 100 and 200 level biology courses at my junior college. When commenters began to challenge my preconceptions, however, I decided to dig deeper, not really looking to prove anything either way, but curious about the reality and whether or not my original video content was defensible. It turned out it was, and it wasn't. It wasn't. But rather than be embarrassed, deleting the video, and abandoning the topic, I decided I wanted to know what I was talking about, to get to the bottom of this. I must admit that I hoped to find evidence which vindicated me, but at that point, what really bothered me wasn't the notion that there could be differences in IQ between races. It was simply the asinine assertions made by racists and race realists about the inferiority of other races. Turns out, I was so wrong in this first video that I wasn't even wrong. 5 days later, I made a second video on the topic, in which I directly addressed some of the points made in Molyneux's interview with Charles Murray. Although the comments I got on that video were mostly positive, a friend from another platform pointed out to me that there did exist a body of evidence which supported Murray's position, notably the bell curve, and he also linked me to a site called the Alternative Hypothesis. I didn't look at that site then, as I was preoccupied with my own dive into psychometric and genetic studies, based on the conversations surrounding Herrnstein and Murray's The Bell Curve. As I explored further, I found an increasingly complex and sophisticated topic, which often seemed contradictory, but which was actually obscure and specific and thus inaccessible to me at that point. I had to take time, sometimes days for a single concept, to begin to understand what I was reading. I had never been interested in statistics before this, and admittedly, my understanding is still lacking. Though I have a much better handle now, some of what I've read remains a mystery to me. Thankfully, if you read enough studies which reference other papers and datasets, their plain English interpretations and discussions will reveal much of the significance of such jargon and statistical analyses. Pro tip: if you're confused by what a study means, read papers which approach the study from several perspectives, if possible. It will give you a good grasp of what's generally accepted, contested, and dismissed, and how information is to be interpreted. After a few months, I decided to begin engaging individuals on YouTube and Reddit, reading long chains of comments and replies in order to get a feel for the various perspectives that existed. In challenging others' claims about the existence of race, the significance of IQ, the science surrounding the conversation, and particular assertions made about racial characteristics, I found myself developing a nuanced understanding of this issue. Individuals on both sides who at first seemed to know preposterous amounts of information regarding this topic began to seem naive to me. Around this time, race and IQ started to really blow up across YouTube, even more than before. Suddenly, even David Pakman was making videos and comments on the topic, and a response by Ryan Falk was how I was reintroduced to the alternative hypothesis. This time, I visited the site. When I first heard about race and IQ, perhaps 2 or 3 years before my first video, the concept didn't trouble me. I didn't see any reason that such a conversation itself should be so controversial. Yet I did and do understand that when positive claims are made about reality, and when subsequent policy prescriptions are presented, which are laughably maladaptive and denigrative to society, there is a real reason for individuals to be concerned and offended. In watching the alternative hypothesis videos, and in reading the many pages on the website, I became increasingly convinced that this was material that needed to be rebuked. It's not particularly difficult to mount an opposition to such material, I thought. So I started looking for such content. What I found dismayed me. Don't get me wrong, there are many personalities across YouTube who've contributed greatly to the conversation, and aided in both sides developing intricate and compelling arguments. But nobody I've so far encountered has systematically dismantled the alternative hypothesis and race realism the way I want. Every person who tried to counter the race realist logic seemed to fall prey to the same trappings, time and time again. And I'm not claiming to be special. I did too. It took me talking to one incredibly gifted professor and some choice aleatory encounters with intellectuals online for me to begin to recognize why each person who's tried to counter these narratives has failed to deliver a knockout blow. I'm not sure I'm at that point either, but I feel I'm taking a step in the right direction. I suppose we'll know by the end of this series. What really disappoints me about both sides of the conversation is that there are often very shady tactics used by both sides. Manipulation, outright misrepresentation of facts, whether intentional or not, and when they are called on these points, most just don't respond. I'm not claiming that everyone is like this, but certain people can't separate their arguments from their egos. They become cemented to their arguments, and when they fail, well, they either ignore those failings or they simply embrace them, focusing their efforts on persuasion rather than honest intellectual investigation. These are not objective people. These are people with an objective. This is my way of calling out both leftists who believe that there is literally no difference between people, and race realists who likewise believe absurd things about the differences between people. And so I figured maybe I, an ex-social constructivist, ex-race realist, categorist, who is willing to admit it when I'm objectively wrong, could take a swing at this topic. I've spent a year getting ready, so let's do it. My name is Nathaniel. I'm a student at Humboldt State University, and I'm about to finish my last term and earn my Bachelor's of Science. I'm of Native American and European descent. I've personally experienced racism, environmental injustice, and have struggled with my own racism and leanings toward race realism. I'm joining this conversation because I believe that objective truth exists and can be divined through rigorous application of skepticism. I'm a Saganite, and Carl's baloney detection kit helped me greatly throughout this process. I'll see you over at part 2.